What if the church was aware of the undead's existence, but chose to keep it concealed to safeguard your soul? Amidst the Enlightenment, when reason reigned and faith was scrutinized, a priest named Father Anselm came across accounts that challenged both scripture and science. Corpses that refused to decay, eyes opening beneath the soil, and whispers from lips long silenced by death. These were no mere fables. They were reported by doctors, soldiers, and clergymen alike. Yet, the deeper Anselm delved, the more terrifying the revelations became. Not just about vampires, but about what they unveiled regarding God, damnation, and humanity itself. Welcome to Tales of Mythology, where ancient myths, forgotten terrors, and supernatural conflicts come alive. If exploring the hidden facets of mythology fascinates you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and tap the bell icon so you never miss another legendary story. What if the church was aware of the undead's existence, but concealed it to protect souls? In an era dominated by Enlightenment reason, where faith was often questioned, Father Anselm, a priest grounded in theology and rational inquiry, encountered unsettling reports that defied both scripture and science. Corpses that refused to decay, eyes opening beneath grave earth, and whispers from death's silent lips. These phenomena, far from mere myth, were documented by doctors, soldiers, and clergy alike. The deeper Anselm delved, the more unsettling the truth revealed itself. Not just about vampires, but about the nature of God, damnation, and humanity itself. Seated by the flickering light of an oil lamp, Father Anselm wrestled with the tension between Enlightenment rationality and these rumors of the undead. How could tales of walking corpses and terror at gravesides persist in a century that prized reason? Voltaire himself scoffed at such beliefs, dismissing the notion of vampires as relics of superstition. Yet, the reports gnawed at Anselm's mind. Were these nothing more than peasant superstitions, or perhaps signs of a dreadful reality that transcended both science and scripture? Weeks before, a letter had arrived from the Habsburg military frontier, detailing the panic-stricken testimonies of villagers from Serbian hamlet named Kisilova. It spoke of a series of mysterious deaths linked to the burial of a peasant, Peter Plejevits. On their deathbeds, victims claimed to be pressed upon and strangled at night by Peter himself, who had died 10 weeks earlier. The man's own widow had fled, convinced her deceased husband had returned, demanding his shoes. Anselm said a prayer, studied his trembling hand, and reminded himself that natural explanations must exist, perhaps disease spreading from the grave or collective hysteria. Yet, bound by both faith and reason, Anselm had dedicated his life to dispelling darkness with truth. Feeling the weight of duty, he resolved to investigate this macabre mystery, acting on behalf of church and science alike. If demons or delusions lurked behind these tales, he would expose them. Leaving the gaslit libraries of Vienna, Father Anselm traveled eastward to rural lands, armed with scholarly works, a well-worn Bible, and an imperial commission. The further he journeyed from the order of the city, the more palpable the ancient fears became. Locals crossed themselves at mentions of the dead and whispered of rosy corpses halted only by stakes through the heart. Though he recorded such stories clinically, anxiety coiled within him. What awaited him in these shadowed villages? Upon receiving unsettling reports from the Habsburg frontier, Father Anselm journeyed to the Serbian village of Kisilova, a place gripped by fear and mourning. The villagers lived under the shadow of a peasant named Peter Plejevits, who had died 10 weeks prior but was believed to have risen from his grave to menace the living. Locals recounted chilling tales, victims who, on their deathbeds, spoke of a dreadful visitor pressing upon them in the night, and Peter's own widow, who fled, convinced that her deceased husband had returned demanding his shoes. Anselm found Kisilova steeped in superstition. Doors were marked with crude crosses, garlic-festooned thresholds, and an atmosphere hung heavy with dread. Meeting with village elders and Father Georgie, the local Orthodox priest, by candlelight, Anselm heard of 9 sudden deaths within a week, victims who blamed the specter of Peter Plegibus. Father Georgie recounted the grim ritual undertaken after exhuming Peter's grave. To their horror, his corpse was astonishingly preserved, almost lifelike, showing new skin, nails, and fresh blood in his mouth. Considering the unnatural state of the body, villagers resolved to drive a wooden stake through his heart and burn the remains. A profane act in the eyes of the church, but deemed necessary by the fearful community. Anselm wrestled with these reports, torn between rational explanations, such as cold preservation, and the mounting evidence of something far more disturbing. The official document in his possession detailed the witness's horror as fresh blood flowed from the staked corpse and unsettling signs manifested. Alone in the small wooden chapel, Anselm grappled with a shaken faith and the dawning realization that the mystery of the undead was not mere superstition, but a terrifying reality, compelling him to continue seeking answers beyond the accepted bounds of reason and doctrine. As Father Anselm delved deeper into his investigation, he uncovered unsettling signs that challenged every principle of reason and faith he held dear. The villagers spoke of rituals both desperate and grim, aimed at halting the menace they feared was stalking them. Anselm learned of the dark tradition of staking and burning the vampire's corpse, acts that twisted the sanctity of human remains, yet seemed necessary to protect the living. Witnessing such rituals firsthand unsettled him. The sight of sharpened wooden stakes driven through the chests of exhumed bodies, followed by the flames consuming the unquiet dead. It all felt like a terrifying dance between superstition and survival. Yet the evidence was more than anecdotal. Official reports and testimonies from imperial officers and clergymen corroborated these dealings with what could only be called the undead. These signs, the refusal of corpses to decay, the fresh blood that pulsed from wounds that should have long been dry, the unearthly groans uttered from staked bodies, all weighed heavily on Anselm's resolve. His rational mind wrestled with the impossible. How could scientific laws account for such phenomena? And if faith failed to explain these horrors, where then lay the truth? The unnerving reality was clear. These were not mere folk tales born of fear or ignorance. No, the undead embodied a profound riddle, one that blurred the line between natural and supernatural, threatening both the intellectual foundations of Anselm's age and the spiritual bedrock of his faith. Upon reaching Medvia, Father Anselm found himself confronting yet another gripping case that deepened the mystery of the undead. The village was gripped by fear over Arnold Pauli, a former soldier whose death had been shrouded in unusual circumstances. Villagers whispered that Arnold's restless spirit now preyed upon the living, striking terror deep into the community. At dawn, Anselm met with the investigation's leader in the graveyard, where the earth showed signs of disturbance. The officer explained that Arnold, plagued by a vampire's curse during his life, had taken desperate measures, consuming some of the vampire's grave earth and smearing himself with its blood in a futile attempt to break free. Yet, despite these precautions, Arnold himself allegedly rose from the dead and became a predator upon his neighbors. As Anselm joined soldiers and surgeons in opening graves, anticipation mixed with dread. While many coffins revealed decayed remains as expected, a few surprised them profoundly. Some corpses appeared remarkably well preserved. An elderly woman, once frail in life, was found plump and oddly rosy. When a surgeon pierced her skin, fresh blood spurted forth, eliciting gasps from the onlookers. Anselm whispered a psalm, clutching his crucifix tightly, overwhelmed by this unnatural sign. The climax came at Arnold Pauli's own grave. Though buried 40 days prior, his flesh remained fresh and vital, a grim paradox in the face of natural decay. The stench of disturbed earth was sharp, yet his corpse looked almost alive. Faced with grim necessity and local customs, they drove a stake through Arnold's heart. To the horror of all present, a low groan emerged from the dead man, accompanied by a gush of fresh blood. The villagers cried out in terror, and Anselm himself struggled to maintain composure. Arnold's remains were promptly incinerated, and the ashes reburied in consecrated ground, according to the rituals observed. Anselm's official report detailed the chilling observations, noting how the evidence defied conventional explanations and challenged Enlightenment reason. Departing Medvia, Anselm carried the weight of these experiences and documents with him. The proof that the undead walked was now undeniable, endorsed by witnesses well-versed in science and governance. His journey's true challenge was just beginning, to reconcile these horrors with faith and reason, and to confront the reality that some terrors persist beyond understanding, haunting both flesh and spirit. Upon returning to his abbey, Father Anselm summoned courage to present his unsettling discoveries before an assembly of church scholars and local officials. In the somber glow of candlelight within the abbey's vaulted chamber, he described the uncanny details: the undecomposed corpses, the fresh blood flowing from staked bodies, and the eerie groans uttered by those long dead. His audience, abbots, physicians, magistrates, and even a visiting Protestant minister, reacted with a mixture of disbelief, shock, and skepticism. The senior abbot gently questioned whether such tales could be accepted as literal truth, given that orthodox teaching declared the dead would not rise until the final resurrection. Scripture promised judgment or life after death, not this unnatural return. The others murmured agreements, their faces pale or doubtful. Father Anselm acknowledged their skepticism, but insisted that he had witnessed these phenomena firsthand, supported by credible accounts from imperial officers and surgeons who had examined the corpses. How could they dismiss such evidence? A physician proposed natural explanations. Perhaps cold weather preserved the bodies, or frightened imaginations misread dark fluids as blood. A Protestant minister dismissed the entire affair as mere superstition, a relic of popish belief. Brother Augustine, a monk and scholar who had aided Father Anselm's research, stood to remind them all that such occurrences were not new. Drawing upon ancient texts, he shared accounts of revenants and vampires spanning centuries and cultures, admitting that even learned men wrestled with how to reconcile these phenomena with theology. The dilemma was profound. If the undead truly rose, it challenged the foundations of faith and natural law alike. Was this a demonic abomination or some unsanctioned resurrection? Could it be explained away as delusion? Or did it compel the Church to reconsider its teachings? Despite differing views, the consensus emerged that dismissing the accounts outright would be folly, and that the matter demanded continued, careful inquiry under the Church's guidance. Alone later that night, Father Anselm reflected on the weight of his revelations. The evidence defied simple dismissal, yet unsettled the very core of doctrine and reason. The struggle between faith and empirical evidence was not easily resolved, and the path forward remained shrouded in uncertainty. Nonetheless, Father Anselm resolved to pursue the mystery further, seeking both spiritual wisdom and scientific truth, knowing that the boundaries of belief and reality were being tested as never before. Throughout the centuries, Father Anselm discerned that encounters with the undead were far from novel. While immersed in the abbey's dimly lit library, he delved into a treasure trove of ancient texts, many locked away due to their controversial nature. These grim records told a familiar tale, restless corpses rising to terrorize the living, prompting communities to employ brutal remedies: exhumation, staking, and incineration. A 14th century letter from a Bavarian monastery described a similar horror. where a bishop ordered the burning of a revenant to quell the terror. Likewise, a 17th century Greek chronicle recounted islanders' fierce battle against a bloodthirsty undead by decapitation and fire, echoing the practices Anselm had witnessed firsthand. Anselm's study of an orthodox treatise revealed a striking theological divergence. The Eastern Church held that excommunicated bodies could become brucolakas, undead revenants that drained the living, while Western tradition saw incorruption as a sign of sanctity. This inverted symbolism revealed how holiness and damnation mirrored each other, constructing dual narratives around death and the afterlife. Further, an occult compendium seized during which trials contained warnings and spells aimed at banishing the corpse-devouring dead, underscoring their deep-rooted presence in folklore and fear. These historical accounts illuminated a persistent theme. The vampire phenomenon transcended eras and cultures, often eluding theological explanation, yet demanding human intervention. For Father Anselm, these records affirmed that the vampire was not merely legend, but a lingering enigma at the crossroads of faith, fear, and the unknown. The undead's shadow stretched across time, challenging humankind's understanding of death, sanctity, and a fragile boundary between the natural and supernatural worlds. Father Anselm reached a turning point in his relentless pursuit of truth about the undead. After immersing himself in historical records and witnessing unexplainable phenomena, he understood that scholarly debate and ancient texts alone would not suffice to solve this enigma. The lingering terror of vampiric entities demanded a direct confrontation. Determined to face the darkness head-on, Anselm resolved to return to the very places where the unnatural had taken root. Armed with his faith, the knowledge accumulated through painstaking research, and a wooden stake he had carved himself, he prepared for a solitary vigil in an abandoned chapel long forsaken after an outbreak of vampirism. This was not merely an act of duty, but a personal trial, where courage would be weighed against fear and his soul tested by the shadow he sought to banish. With prayer on his lips and resolve hardening in his heart, he stepped into the cold ruin, ready to confront the horrors that lurked beyond the grave. As night cloaked the ruined chapel in shadows, Father Anselm stepped inside, lantern in hand and heart heavy with resolve. This dilapidated sanctuary was the last refuge of a village haunted by the undead, abandoned by its frightened inhabitants after the rise of the vampire Stefan. The freshly turned earth near the altar marked the young man's hasty burial. Unbaptized and feared, Stefan was said to have risen nightly to torment the living. Anselm carefully set his tools upon a stone ledge, a worn Bible, a flask of holy water, and a wooden stake he had carved himself. He knelt, steadied his breath, and began to pray quietly. The silence was broken only by his heartbeat and the faint scurry of a rat amid church debris. Hours passed, and as midnight drew near, the lantern's flame flickered, though the air remained still. Anselm's chanting faltered when something moved beyond the reach of the light. Gripping his crucifix tightly, he called out in a wavering voice, commanding peace in the name of Christ. From the darkness came a low, haunting sound, part laughter, part moan. Suddenly, a human-like figure lurched into view near a collapsed doorway, two faintly glowing eyes fixed upon him with predatory intensity. Anselm recognized the figure. It was Stefan, or what remained of him, transformed into a grotesque vampire. Pale skin stretched over sharp features stained with dried blood, and hunger burned in hollow eyes. Though terror clutched his throat, Anselm stood firm. He spoke gently, offering mercy and praying for Stefan's soul. But the creature answered with a hiss like a wild cat and sprang forward with unnatural speed, retreating to the altar's base. Anselm found sanctuary within the circle of holy water he had sprinkled. The vampire snarled, pressing just beyond the blessed boundary, as if testing its limits. Drawing his Bible, Anselm began an exorcism, Latin prayers ringing in the ruined chapel. The creature recoiled, pain flickering in its eyes, but its ferocity intensified, circling faster, mocking the rituals. Then a voice, eerie and ancient, echoed from the being, a taunt that Anselm's faith was weak, that salvation was beyond him. Doubt slithered into the priest's heart. Gathering his courage, he raised his voice with scripture, momentarily driving the monster back. Yet the vampire's horrific laughter filled the chamber again, and it stepped, painstakingly crossing the holy water's boundary. Anselm's resolve wavered. Desperation clenched his hand around the wooden stake. His scholarly knowledge evaporated in the face of raw evil. In a fleeting moment of clarity, a forbidden incantation whispered on his lips, words learned from heretical grimoire, a dark command to bind a vampire. Though the church forbade such sorcery, Anselm uttered the strange Latin, and the creature froze mid-leap, restrained by invisible bonds. Its furious eyes widened in shock as it struggled and snarled, but hesitation gripped Anselm. These were not prayers, but arcane spells risking his very soul. Withdrawing from the dark path, he dropped the stake and clutched his silver crucifix, summoning all his faith. Trembling, he began a fervent chant of the Ave Maria, the sacred hymn resonating across the chapel's broken stones. The vampire hissed, recoiling as smoke rose from its flesh like searing light. The conflicted corpse writhed caught between the arcane and the holy. Anselm pressed forward, voice rising in prayer, driving Stephen's fiendish form toward the open grave. With a final agonized shriek, the vampire fled, not underground, but out through a shattered wall into the dark forest beyond. Left alone in the eerie silence, Anselm sank to his knees, his sobbing prayer mingling relief and sorrow. The creature was gone for now, banished or repelled but not destroyed. Exhausted and marked by the ordeal, he understood that Stephen was more than a dead man risen. He was a manifestation of humanity's darkest fears and spiritual corruption. This night had forever transformed Father Anselm's quest, from a search for reason to a battle for faith against an ancient and relentless evil. In the shadowed silence of that ruined chapel, Father Anselm faced a revelation far beyond the corporeal horror before him. The confrontation with Stephen, once a man, now an unholy creature, had peeled back layers of fear and faith to reveal something deeper, something profoundly human. As the vampire recoiled from his prayers and the crucifix, the priest recognized that this beast was not merely a monster of flesh and blood, but a living symbol of humanity's darkest anxieties. The vampire embodied a twisted reflection of our deepest fears, the terror of death, the dread of eternal damnation, and a perversion of the soul's rest. It stood as a blasphemous inversion of divine order, a corrupted resurrection, a manifestation of sin and spiritual decay that mocked the sacred rites of burial and the promise of salvation. Stephen was not just prey upon the living. He was a mirror held up to the priest's own doubts, his wavering faith, and the fragile boundaries between this world and the next. In that harrowing silence after the creature fled, Anselm understood that the vampire was no mere folklore nor a simple, unholy fiend. It was a philosophical wound, a living metaphor for the perils of immortality, sought without virtue. It was a creature born from mankind's yearning to cheat death, yet cursed for defying the order of life and death ordained by God. This revelation marked a turning point in Anselm's journey. The vampire was not just a threat to flesh, but a challenge to faith, a riddle wrapped in darkness that questioned the very essence of human existence. To confront such a being was to confront the shadows within oneself, the fears, desires, and the eternal struggle between light and darkness that define the human soul. In the centuries following Father Anselm's encounter with the undead, the vampire figure underwent a remarkable transformation. The creature that Anselm confronted, a grotesque, mud-caked peasant corpse risen from the grave, bears little resemblance to the elegant, seductive vampire that would later captivate literary and popular imagination. This evolution was no accident, but a reflection of the shifting anxieties and desires of each era, as the Enlightenment's rigid rationalism gave way to the emotional currents of Romanticism. The vampire myth morphed from a fearsome abomination into a complex symbol. It was no longer just a predator of the dead, but a noble, aristocratic figure, cursed yet cultured, intelligent yet eternally tormented. This new vampire arrived with a silver cane and a melancholy smile, embodying themes of seduction, immortality, and tragic loss. Father Anselm, in the twilight of his life, encountered early manuscripts of this emerging narrative and noted how the essential nature of the vampire endured despite its changing guise. Beneath the surface of this evolution remained the same dark undercurrent: hunger for life at the expense of the living, the perversion of resurrection, and a profound theological abomination. Whereas the earlier vampire repulsed outright, the refined vampire tempted and fascinated, making it all the more insidious. Anselm recognized this shift with apprehension, understanding that the vampire no longer posed merely a corporeal threat, but challenged the very soul through allure and subversion. Over time, the vampire transcended folklore to become a versatile metaphor within literature, theater, and eventually film. It epitomized human fears and desires, addiction, seduction, and even critiques of capitalism. Yet, no matter how varied the portrayals, the vampire remained a haunting symbol of mankind's yearning to escape death without consequence, to live forever without sacrifice or grace. In recognizing this, Father Anselm's legacy extended beyond chronicling the undead horrors of his era. He foresaw the vampire as an enduring mythos, constantly adapting yet perpetually reflecting humanity's darkest wishes and fears. The vampire, in all its forms, remains a mirror, a dark echo of our own desire for immortality and the peril it conceals. Father Anselm's journey unearths a profound truth. The vampire transcends mere monstrosity, serving instead as a reflection of humanity's yearning for immortality free from consequence. This chilling mirror exposes the deepest fears and desires woven into faith and existence itself. Through his relentless pursuit, Anselm reveals that the undead embody more than folklore. They symbolize the eternal struggle between light and darkness within the soul, challenging us to confront the very essence of life, death, and what lies beyond. If you found Father Anselm's journey into the truth behind the undead captivating, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with others who are fascinated by the mysteries hidden within mythology and history. Dive deeper with us into the shadows where legends live, and beware, the truth may challenge what you hold as real.